language that I recommend to everyone. But I'll make my talk.
Yeah, that's true. It's becoming easier too, right?
Absolutely. You don't have to program it yourself anymore.
Yeah. All right, I think we can give it a go. Yeah. All right, so hello and welcome everybody to the Language Technology and Data Analysis Laboratory Webinar Series 2021. My name is Martin Schweinberger, and because the Language Technology and Data Analysis Lab, LADAL, is established and sponsored by the University of Queensland, I'm reading out an acknowledgement of country, which is traditional for Australian universities. So the University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognize their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So we do this to respect the traditional owners of the lands in Australia, and particularly the lands on which the universities are situated. If you want to know more about the LADAL, you can go and visit the homepage. You see the URL there. You can also find information about the Opening Webinar Series. You can find information and abstracts about previous talks and upcoming talks. And you'll also find links to the recordings once they're made available on the YouTube channel of LADAL. You can follow LADAL on Twitter via its handle @SLC-LADAL, and you'll contact LADAL staff directly using the SLC LADAL email, which is slcladal@uq.edu.au. It's a real pleasure and honor to introduce today's speaker, Natalia Levshina. Natalia is a linguist working at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics in Nijmegen. Her main research interests are cognitive and functional linguistics, pragmatics, typology, corpora, and data science. She obtained her PhD at the Catholic University Leuven in 2011 and got her habilitation qualification at Leipzig University in 2019 with a thesis entitled Towards a Theory of Communicative Efficiency. In addition to papers on causatives, differential case marking, politeness, word order variation, and other linguistic topics, Natalia is the author of a best-selling statistical manual, How to Do Linguistics with R, which I'm sure many of us know and very much appreciate. I do, at least. So it's a real pleasure to introduce Natalia. Thank you so much for being part of this webinar series. And I'll hand over to Natalia's talk and to her. And her talk is entitled Recycle, Repeat, Relax and Repeat, Advantages of Bayesian Inference in Comparison with Frequentist Methods. I'll stop sharing and hand over to you, Natalia.
Okay, thanks a lot for this nice introduction, and yes, for this opportunity to share my enthusiasm about Bayesian methods, and in particular Bayesian regression, which I find a very great working tool in a linguist toolkit. Right, let me now share my screen. Okay, hope everything is working properly. Good. So, right. Let's start. So, most of us have some background in frequentist statistics, also known as classical statistics or maximum likelihood estimation. And it's, I think, especially in the context of regression modeling, it's known under different names. And most of us probably have some training in that and have published papers or applying these methods in research. But at the moment, there's kind of momentum. There is a growing interest in Bayesian statistics and Bayesian inference and Bayesian regression. So there are some early examples are a paper by Vasisht and et al. On processing of Chinese relative clauses, a paper by Oliver Scribner about VO and OV word order patterns and Latin and Old French. And I also published a paper using STAN for Bayesian inference on English permissive constructions. And I think now we see more and more Bayesian models applied to solve different linguistic questions. Then I would like to start with showing you advantages and main principles of Bayesian inference. Well, there are also some disadvantages, but I'll mention them too. But I see mostly advantages, and I use these tools more and more frequently in my own work, and I also find it easy to explain to students. Then I will show you a case study of help and infinitive, this alternation in English, and I will show how you can actually recycle priors from previous model, for your previous results, and use a smaller data set for estimation, and which can help you save time, energy, effort, and still get a nicer result than you would get with a maximum likelihood model. Right. So these are some main advantages, in my opinion, of Bayesian inference. First of all, it gives us an opportunity to test the research hypothesis directly. And by research hypothesis, I don't mean like is it big questions like nature and nurture or something like this. It's more about more local hypotheses, at least in my own research experience. Of course, maybe there are other applications, but my research hypothesis is a variational linguist usually. So does this factor have a role? Does it help to predict the use of certain linguistic variants? So this is what I mean by my research hypothesis. Of course, other people have others. For example, some factors processing ease, frequency play a role in language processing, for example. That could be a research hypothesis too. So we can kind of test this research hypothesis instead of trying to reject the null hypothesis that some factor doesn't play a role, or there is no correlation, there is no difference between different groups, for example, and so on. This is what we normally do in frequentist statistics. But now we can actually have a probability of the research hypothesis given the data. Then next, Bayesian inference doesn't rely on p-values, and it doesn't encourage binary decisions like accept or reject something, the null hypothesis. And this helps to enrich our knowledge about the impact of contextual factors, because instead of this yes or no, we have a continuum, and we can report this continuum, and this can be useful for other researchers or for your own research later. So, and this also has a nice side effect. There is less it encourages less p-hacking, and so this is kind of trying to manipulate your data, to transform it and so on in such a way that there's like some significant small p-values to report, and you know, there's this bias towards publishing the results where you have some significant effects. And then finally, of course, there are many other advantages, but for our discussion, one can also use information from previous researchers' priors for subsequent models and then recycle them, and this is good for scientific progress. So traditional methods, traditional statistics usually involves null hypothesis significant testing. There is this long tradition. And in this case, the null hypothesis is rejected when the probability of observing the test statistic in more extreme values under the null hypothesis is smaller than some predetermined level. You know, this people usually take 0.05 as a cutoff point, and then say yes or no, whether they can reject the null hypothesis. But this also means that we're interested in the likelihood of data given the null hypothesis. And how interesting is that? I'm not really sure. So because a Bayesian inference allows us to estimate the probability of the research hypothesis given the data, or here I use this notation and like condition probability. So we have probability of hypothesis given data. hope you know this notation a little bit. And so how to get it from Bayes' rule, which I won't talk about because usually you don't need to be a Bayesian statistician in order to use Bayes' rule. So I won't focus on that. It's very, I think, popular and easy to find this information. So it follows that the probability of hypothesis given the data, that's something we're interested in, is proportional to combination of the probability of data given hypothesis and the probability of the hypothesis itself. Or in Bayesian terms, so this probability of hypothesis given the data is called posterior. The probability of data given hypothesis is likelihood, and the probability of hypothesis before we see any data is called priors. So then posterior, something that we're interested in, is a kind of a combination of data and our prior knowledge. So that's what it's about. So let's take an imaginary example. So it's in this talk, I will use a case study later about the variation between help to infinitive and help bear infinitive, like help do and help to do. And let's imagine if we ask people what they think about whether people use to or bear infinitive more often, they may have different expectations. Let's take, and these expectations will be kind of priors. They can be different kind of priors, and it's important that in Bayesian statistics we present all kinds of probabilities as probability distributions, all kinds of expectations, and our posterior knowledge as well. So that means, for example, if you take a person like Anne, like shown here, this of course fictive names. We can, for example, Anne thinks, oh, it's probably people use bare infinitive and to infinitive, probably, yeah, more or less with the same frequency, but I'm also okay if there is some bias. So, but although I think that it's not very likely, she believes that there is maybe free variation. Maybe most people would say, okay, I don't know when to is used when it's omitted. And so then one could show that represented in this plot, you know, in the left top corner with these. So this kind of graph shows this probability distribution shows your potential beliefs before she says any data. Then let's take Bill. Bill probably maybe is much more convinced that there is free variation. So it doesn't matter what. So there's freedom when to use to and bare infinitive. And so he's kind of more convinced that it's free variation and it's these variants are used interchangeably, so his priors are kind of narrow. So as you can see in this graph, and that if we take some person like Clara, shown here, this straight line shows that she has no expectations whatsoever. So whatever is the behavior people is, yeah, well, it's all fine with her. She has no. So this is called flat priors. So indeed they look flat. It's because there are no preferences. And now imagine that these people, maybe they're linguists, and then they see some data. And there is a bias towards bare infinitive here, and so the data are the same. And so these probabilities in the data are shown, represented here, and they are the same for all the three participants. They have identical data. And then after looking at the data, and we've got likelihood here, and combining them with their prior expectations before seeing the data, we get posteriors. And so this is the essence of kind of Bayesian method. So we have posteriors, for example, and they have different shapes depending on priors and likelihood, but likelihood here was the same. And so this means that like Anne here, she has some yeah, you see she didn't have any strong expectation, but she was pretty open-minded. And now her posteriors kind of are similar to the data, although they're slightly still more moved towards a kind of no preference for bare or to infinitive, to the middle of this distribution. Then with Bill, you see that is a kind of still close because he had stronger beliefs before seeing the data. His posterior beliefs are also kind of still more skewed towards like the middle, where his original beliefs were. And for Clara, she had zero expectations, flat price, so the likelihood the data and posteriors are the same. She only could get some inspiration from the data, and she had no prior beliefs clear any preferences. So her posteriors look exactly the same as the likelihood graph here. So this shows how this price and likelihood of data interact and in shaping up the posteriors, and posteriors represents the probability of hypothesis given data after we've seen the data. And so there is a kind of an important thing when actually we saw that price influence posteriors, how strongly you believe in something, but also when the amount of data matters. So when your data set is large, the frequentist and Bayesian methods will converge because a frequentist data basically represents likelihood. So and especially if your price are weakly or moderately informative, like ends, that's or if also if you have flat price. So this is why it makes sense to perform a price sensitivity analysis in order to see whether different types of price really have an effect. But maybe it's just pointless to use any price because the data are so massive that it will beat all prior expectations, and that's something to be aware of. Right, so priors are very useful actually. They allow the researchers to use smaller samples, and this is good if the data are costly. For example, many of us work with spoken corpora, and some people work with multimodal corpora. Also, if you're a typologist, you'll know that some typological distributions are very sparse, and there's not much to draw inference from. So this is where it can be helpful to use priors. And in experimental linguistics as well, so data are pretty costly. Then another thing is that it's kind of more global because recycling one's knowledge can help us to overcome the recent crisis of reproducibility in research. So the plausibility of the old findings can be estimated in the light of new data, and when these findings are incorporated into a new model, so it kind of helps. And priors also help to avoid problems such as loss of statistical power, overfitting, convergence issues that many of us deal with on a daily basis. And this problem, often arise when we fit generalized mixed effect models with complex structure, many random slopes, and then you'll see that everything is falling apart. So this is kind of also a nice solution. Right, there are also some practical benefits of using weakly informative priors similar to ANS, where you kind of don't have clear preferences, and but still you have some vague idea which values are more and less likely, even if you don't bias the outcome to any kind of positive and negative values. Here, then these priors help to exclude unrealistic values of coefficients in regression, and this can be useful in situations of data sparseness, for example. So, and if you do logistic regression like I do, it's a lot to deal with language variation. So, and there's a binary outcome where there's help with to infinitive or bare infinitive. And in this case, these logistic regression coefficients are very likely to be in the interval between -5 and +5, and unlikely to be outside of that range. So if you have a data set of a moderate size, and you have something like estimates of -10 log odds ratios and or +10, So that means that you're doing something wrong. And so, and then you can also reflect these expectations in price. Now, but the problem is, and this is why Bayesian statistics wasn't very popular until recently, is that it's difficult to combine price and the data, this likelihood, and in order to obtain the posteriors. So in some cases, like in these distributions that I showed you with these beliefs about there or to infinitive, it can be easy, and you can, or relatively easy, you can at least do this, like compute that mathematically, even maybe with a pencil and paper, but because the shapes of these distributions are the same, so there's kind of the same family. And but very often, especially if you have many different variables in your model, that's impossible to do. And the actually return of Bayesian thinking started with appearance of large, powerful, powerful computers, not necessarily large. So we can approximate these posteriors not by performing these fully determine these curves of this distribution mathematically, but we can approximate them instead by sampling from posteriors. So by drawing a large number of representative points from this posterior distribution that we want to get. And this is something we can do with the help of a Markov chain Monte Carlo or MCMC algorithm. And so this, why is it called Markov chain Monte Carlo? Because a Monte Carlo simulation is any simulation that draws random values from a distribution. And the Markov chain process is a random walk when the next step doesn't depend on the steps before the current position. This is just what this MCMC means. And amazingly, this MCMC is supposed to converge to the target distribution, target posterior distribution that we want to get, regardless of whether this initial position was. I don't have time to show you that, so it would take a lot of time, but we can use it very easily for Bayesian regression. And then we also usually create several chains which consist of thousands of iterations. So the disadvantage of that is obvious, it's computationally costly to run this, but well, you can actually, to save some time, if you have several chains, you can parallelize these computations, these calculations, and then it will help you to save time. But still, you often need to be show some patience and don't expect that you will get everything immediately. Right, so this is shows that what the Markov chain of, for example, this is the results of some analysis. It's so the x-axis shows the number of iterations. This is the kind of the steps in this random samplings in this Markov chain, and the y-axis shows this the posterior value of coefficient in logistic regression, for example. So and this kind of Markov chain should look like a fat and hairy caterpillar that's not bending in any direction, like it's shown here, more or less. And so if it looks like this, it means that yeah, the chain has converged to that. And also there are no big autocorrelations, means that one value doesn't depend on the previous value. Like, but if you see something like shown below in this plot, something went terribly wrong. You shouldn't use this model. But actually, most samplers right now are that, at least the ones that we used in the BRMS package, it's also called NUTS sampler, are actually very good, and they converge quickly, and they are very efficient. So, and then after, if you have all these samples, you can summarize them. And for example, here we have random walk with 4,000 posterior samples. So, and then we can actually represent this as a distribution and summarize and get all kinds of statistics. For example, we can compute the mean, we can compute the median, and we can get also this 95% credible interval where 95% of all these posteriors lie. So this is yeah, very flexible. So you can see here, for example, the posterior distribution of log-odds ratio. It's again, it's logistic regression model to infinitive versus bare infinitive. So this is the frequency of different values in sample. This shows you can see where the mean is and where the 95% of all these samples are located, what kind of values they have. And this is all based on this theory caterpillar with this random walk, MCMC. Now, but you actually don't have to think much about all these issues because we have, but still I wanted to discuss them because so that you have a general idea, because we have a wonderful package called BRMS for Bayesian regression models, and it uses a syntax very similar to expressions using the package LME4, which is probably the default package for all kind of mixed effects models. And it's so BRMS is based on Stan, and back in old days, one had to actually program everything in Stan. It's also programming language based on C++, so it's very efficient. So it's used for Bayesian and other types of inference. But now you just don't have to do that and specify your models like I did, and it took some time and learning. But now you can just use the same syntax as you use for your mixed effect models in LME4. So let me now show you a case study and try to convince you that show you some advantages in practice. So this is a case study of helpless to or bare infinitive, and this is one illustration here where, unfortunately I can't see. Try to move this. Okay, now it works. Right. So it's just funny on the internet. There are many books and different resources on how to survive the zombie apocalypse. And never knew that it's actually. Oh, someone is drawing something here on my slides. I don't know why you're doing this.
What?
I think some person has drawn something on my slides. That's weird. Do you see the green lines? Okay, that's creepy. So, all right. So I chose this also because I came to this topic because I was looking for. Okay, some lines are appearing again. Okay.
Seems to be Jesus Kelly. Maybe we should have to throw him out.
Yes, maybe. That's a good idea. Are we being bombed? Martin?
I've removed the person.
Okay, thanks. It's the first time I experienced something like that. Okay, so and then you can see many examples with help there. So, for example, this is funny. If this book doesn't help you to survive the zombie apocalypse, a full refund will be given in cash or shotgun shells. So that's absolutely very helpful, of course. So and then the example is here, not help you to survive the zombie apocalypse, help you to survive. So you see the two is used. And there is another okay example with here is how items in your emergency kit can help you survive the zombie apocalypse. So it's they bear infinitive is used, a very similar situation. Okay, now the previous research, there's been a lot, and it has discovered a lot of different factors that influence this. So first, there were some descriptive studies focusing on very different factors, and also multivariate models, and shows that there are many different contextual factors plus regional and stylistic variation. So just to name you some factors, so things like the form of help matters apparently for the choice between the two and the bare infinitive. So the for example, the base form help occurs with the bare infinitive more frequently than the other forms. So, for instance, it is his job to see through the contracts that will help rebuild Iraq. And then there is also another observation that the form helping shows the highest proportion of two infinitives. For instance, many partners with South African companies on projects that are helping to rebuild the country's infrastructure. So helping will boost the chances of two. It's usually often used with two. Then another factor is distance between help and the infinitive. So the more words there are between help and the infinitive, the higher the chances of the two infinitives. So this is an example where there are really many words. So HUD will provide $70 million for 1,300 rental vouchers to help people in public housing projects in Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, Baltimore, and New York to move into surrounding middle class and affluent suburbs. So apparently it's difficult to recognize and to move as a maybe complement of help, and so it is that's why two kind of used to this more explicit grammatical option is used. Then we can also name here another cognitive factor, probably, or stylistic factor, but is, I think, still it probably has some cognitive interpretation. So it's hora-acqui, so-called principle. It's or avoidance of identity. We avoid repeating identical elements when they are located closely. So if the verb help is preceded by two, then the second infinitive is usually without two. For instance, with yoga, find a teacher who will make adjustments to help prevent injuries, right? So that's another factor. Then the chances of the marked infinitive and the infinitive with two are also high if the helpee is implicit. Like physical therapy has helped me improve my posture, and here we have the bare infinitive, and if there is zero infinitive, then two is more likely to be used. His encouragement and guidance helped to improve my health and self-confidence. And then I took data from the magazine section from the Corpus of Contemporary American English. I'll skip how exactly I did that in the universal dependencies and so on. I'll just move on to the actual analysis. And so I had two samples, and one was large with 2050 examples, and another one was small because I also performed some additional manual annotation, and there were only 400 examples. It's because this manual annotation was very, very tiring and time-consuming. And so then I decided to have a smaller sample. And let's see how these factors affect the role of these variables behave in predicting their two or bare infinitive. So now, so the response variable is obviously the bare or two infinitive. I also had the year as when the text was published in Coca, I mean, which was taken to Coca. And then I also had an expectation that the proportion of the two infinitives slightly decreases with time because there is ongoing auxiliarization of help. Right, I also took into account this hora-acqui factor, whether there is a no two before help itself. Then log transformed distance, the number of words between help and the infinitive to disregarding. The morphological form of help, help, helps, helping, and helped, whether there is a helpee explicit. Then also I took the helper semantic class, animate and animate missing, and so the individual verbs were taken as random intercepts here that fill in this infinitable slot. And for this very small sample, and I'll explain it a little bit, I wanted to test one interesting principle formulated by Levshina, the principle of rhythmic alternation, which means it's a tendency to avoid sequences of stressed syllables, so-called stress clash, and sequences of unstressed syllables. It's called stress lapse. So it's and it has been shown to matter for some other alternations, and so this variable was called stress, and so I called it, it was very, very time consuming to go there because one had to just pronounce all these sentences. Right, so let me now finally move on to the result, these models. So I took this, so this is the just maximum likelihood model, the normal GLMR that we all use for studying this kind of variation. It's logistic. And so this is just a normal table of coefficients that people are used to seeing with a fixed these are the fixed effects. So we see, the estimates and errors, 0, z value, and the probability, this is the p-value. And so we have, so this shows the chances of the two infinitive against the chances of the odds of the bare infinitive. So which means that the year, for example, has a negative estimate. It means that it's as time goes, the chances of the two infinitive decrease, and it means that the chances of the bare infinitive increase. And so, and there are other factors. So this is what it shows. So this is the probability of the two infinitives, and there is also no, actually, if you see that the helper, so if it's animate, so it's not statistically significant here. Or when it's also when it's missing, sometimes it's not easy to decide whether it's animate or inanimate. And so this is what it basically represents. So there's some slight effect of apparently that inanimate helpers will boost the chances of two infinitive, but yeah, there is no significant effect. So we would have to throw it out, right? Throw it away. Then there are some interactions here, which, for example, the effect of distance depends on whether the effect of hierarchy also kind of, it's very strong when you have very small distance between, so the verb follows immediately the second verb, and when the distance is large, it's doesn't have an effect anymore, so as expected. Or this is the interaction between morphological form and the helpee. So the helpee, if there is no helpee, like helping to do something, the chances of the two infinitive are very high. And now, as for Bayesian model, so I also fitted it. And so, then one question one has immediately is the choice of priors, and one can use the default non-informative priors, and the model doesn't have to worry about anything, and what one can also have different priors for, especially for fixed effects that might be particularly relevant for this topic. So one can use these are some popular priors for logistic regression model, at least. So one could use normal priors, and like here they are around 0. So it means that we don't impose any expectations, but we kind of can a little bit reduce variability there. So that totally big values like 10 and -10 are impossible. If you remember, I mentioned that already. So then kind of one can have T priors, like the student T with different degrees of freedom. One can, or usually a popular option is so-called Cauchy priors. So you see they're all centered around 0, but they have different flexibility and different kind of freedom for more extreme values. And Cauchy priors are kind of still allow some, so they are not more relaxed as far as the tails of the distribution is concerned. So this is why many people prefer them. And so this shows the kind of sensitivity analysis, and it shows the different priors, default, Cauchy, student, normal priors, and also the results of maximum likelihood model. And you can see that they're all pretty, so they're most of the coefficients. So this is 95% credible intervals, or and then you can see that they show similar results, especially here. That's so basically we have no difference between maximum likelihood and Bayesian model if we have a big data set. But so why bother them? So this is extra computation and other things. So why? So is there any advantage? Well, actually, yes. Then you can also compute an interesting thing. So this probability of your research hypothesis given the data, the posterior probabilities. So you can get actually from these posterior distributions the probability that this parameter will be positive or negative. For example, this shows the probability of betas, the coefficients in the regression model, to be greater than 0, to be positive. And so then one can see that, so it's expressed as percentages. And so this is how can be very useful. And for example, we can see that the chances of animate helpers of being positive are 4.8%. That's pretty close to 0. And if you remember, if we just use maximum likelihood, we have just thrown this from the model out. And here we don't actually need to do that. We can just report that the chances of having negative effect are 95.2%, and this is quite substantial. This is quite useful. So it might make sense to keep this information in the model and pass this and report this information and give this to, I don't know, future generations who can take that into account in their modeling. Right, so and then if we take this small sample where I had this time-consuming variable coded, and then I just took normal priors with the means and standard deviations of posterior from the big Bayesian model. So I just recycled those posteriors and use them as priors in the small to work on this small data sample. So what do we see them? So this shows different. So actually 4 models. Then we have the big and small sample size, and also maximum likelihood and Bayesian regression. I also fitted a maximum likelihood model for the smaller sample. And this is one that shows that these gray confidence intervals with these triangles, they actually don't behave well. So this is when we take small sample and then try to fit the maximum likelihood model, and it doesn't work very well. Although the Bayesian model, which is kind of with a small sample, it behaves similarly to the big models, and so which is and it's based on the same data, but we use here informative priors from the big model. Right, so this small sample maximum likelihood model also, as you can see, it performs very poorly. So the coefficients are all over the place. Also, there are other problems. It doesn't converge. The confidence intervals are so broad that they even do not fit on the boundaries of the plot between -8 and 8. I had to omit that information. So that's totally unrealistic. And so the C index is 0.99, and if you're familiar with that, you will never see that very often in regression, logistic regression. So this is the goodness of fit measure. And it indicates that model strongly overfits data, and so it means it fits the noise, and if we take another sample, it will be useless. So it's not a reducible model. But the Bayesian model with strong priors based on a small sample behaves similar to the large sample models. And so we don't also have interesting effects of the stress variable, so which means that maybe it was good that we tried this without coding the data further and spending a lot of time. So to conclude, I hope that this example has shown how we can build on our knowledge from previous studies and recycle the results. Then the informative priors also help to keep the model reasonable in cases of data sparseness and small data sets. And given this hard, tedious work on manual annotation, maybe some people enjoy it. I've met a couple, but this can still, it's more interesting, I think, to get the results. And this can help us test new hypotheses using smaller sample, I hope, and it can help speed up the process of accumulating knowledge and lead to more efficient use of our resources, which I think is good for everyone. So thank you very much. So that's it.